And here we are at IATEFL again, so it's good to be back. It might be an idea briefly to clarify what each of us understands or means by unplugged, in my case, and connected in Burcu's. And I know that some of you will have heard the kind of principles of teaching unplugged or of dogma before, but some of you won't, and I think it's important to know where we're coming from, if you like, in terms of understanding where we've found that ideas do meet and come together. Teaching Unplugged, as I said, is a book that I co-wrote with Scott Thornbury, and it grew out of the Dogma in ELT movement, which started 13 years ago now. And dogma lessons, the simplest way that I can find to describe dogma lessons is to say that they're based on the lives and the language of the learners. It's a simple idea, but the practice, like any teaching practice, is complex and subtle and needs refining over time. And when we came to write the book, we wanted to provide educators with a framework which would either help them to experiment with unplugged teaching or give them a way to measure what they were doing against some other ideas. And we came up with 3 principles. The 3 principles were that lessons should be conversation-driven, that they should be materials-light, and that they should be focused on emergent language. And Scott and myself chose our words very carefully. And when we're asked questions about teaching unplugged and what is or isn't kind of possible or allowable even sometimes in a dogma lesson, we often refer people to the principles and to the precise wording of the principles. So for example, if somebody asks, are unplugged lessons only conversation? Are they just conversation classes? The answer is no. They're conversation driven, but that doesn't mean that they have to either start with conversation or be restricted to conversation. It doesn't preclude writing short text either. And even since we started Dogma 13 years ago, and in a way since we started teaching Unplugged, the definition or the distinction between speaking and writing has changed. And we do a lot of talking now. Some of you will be doing it right now, I guess, on Twitter or Facebook with our fingers. You know, is that conversation? Is it writing? Is it speaking? You know, it's somewhere between the two. So conversation is kind of shifting as technology changes that. Another frequently asked question, is it okay to use materials sometimes? Or can I use any materials? Or is it all right to use Dogma and the course book? To which the answer is, yes, you can use materials, and yes, you can use Dogma with a course book. But the key is not to fill your lesson plan or your planning for the lesson with materials, with pre-prepared content. Because if you do that, you'll find that there's less room for conversation, and the classes won't be conversation-driven. It's good to use short texts as stimulus. You can use audio stimulus, video stimulus. And the principle really is that less is more. You know, leave room for the learner's interests and responses and work with those in terms of language and lesson content. And encourage them to bring their own stimulus, which is really relevant when it comes to the use of 2.0 tools. The third frequently asked question I'd like to share with you is, well, does this mean we can't give our learners grammar practice? Can we not do kind of vocabulary exercises? I mean, yes, of course, you can give your learners grammar practice, you can do vocabulary exercises, you can use drills, all kinds of evolved teaching practices that work. The difference is that we're doing so in response to what the learners have come up with, and we're not preempting their language needs all the time. Above all, teaching this way means being creative, being collaborative, and being active as teachers and learners in the learning process. Well, that's what I understand by Unplugged. Burcu, tell us about being connected.
Okay. Well, at the times when my only connections were my colleagues in the staff room back in 2001, when I first started teaching, I attended a seminar by Scott Thornbury. That was the day I became a fan of him, but that was also the day I felt so nervous. He made me feel terrible. He talked about the dogma movement. I love the idea, but the materials light approach made me really nervous. Because in those years, I used to go into the classroom with piles of materials and 3 different plans just in case something went wrong. But Scott made me think about it, and as I got more experienced, I felt more confident and keen to try different approaches in my classrooms. And I started enjoying dogma moments in my lessons. I've been always interested in technology, and I've been a connected teacher for more than 4 years. By being connected, I mean using Twitter, Facebook for professional purposes, and also writing a blog. And I think being connected gives you more opportunities to teach unplugged. When you're connected, you build a personal learning network. It's a network of like-minded educators from all around the world who share similar interests, but who teach different countries, different contexts. And this gives you the opportunity to see very good practices and get inspiring ideas, very good ideas from them, and become a better teacher, I think. Become a more creative and a better teacher. And also having a personal learning network helps you gain awareness of available EdTech tools. And you become more capable of choosing the best tools for your classrooms, the most appropriate ones. You can also get very quick and very smart answers to your questions when you post something on Twitter or Facebook. You ask a question and you hear from your personal learning network, your connections from, like half an hour, and you get very quick and very good answers from them. And another great opportunity is that with the help of the connections you make, you can make connections between your classes and the real world, and this is something great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Burcu. Here we go. This is where I struggle with the technology. All right, so I've told you a little bit about how I've been teaching and what Unplugged means to me. Burcu's done the same in terms of being a connected teacher. So what is the connection between the two? Is a connection necessary? Is it positive? Is it problematic? After all, you can teach unplugged without using materials. That's one of the strengths of it as a teaching approach, is that it can be done in very low, minimally resourced teaching contexts. And you can also use technology without using an unplugged teaching framework. As Hakan said in his talk earlier today, you can use SpringPad, which he was connecting with Dogma, without Dogma. So the two approaches don't have to be used together and can be used separately. One of the things we did when we ran our course in December was to ask participants what they thought the connections might be. And we drew a very complex diagram, which I invite you to make your own copy of. What we did was say, all right, here's unplugged, and here's connected. What are the kind of key ideas that you think are pretty much in the unplugged side of that diagram? What are the key ideas that are connected, and what are the ones which belong in between the two? And we just invite you now to have a go at this yourselves. You can either do it mentally just by looking at that diagram. If you're a visual learner and you'd like to do some drawing, and have a go at those circles. If anyone draws two perfect circles, you're going to make a lot of money as an artist, and you're in the wrong job. So, this is an interesting task from that point of view. But just ask yourselves where you think the connections might be, where the ideas might not fit, where they do. If you want to talk to somebody next to you, please do. If you're tired of turning to people next to you after a day of workshops, and you'd rather just have a think, then please just have a think. But just for a minute or two. So if you want to have a little word with someone, do. Otherwise, do it yourself. Yeah. Thank you very much. Where's Anthony when you need to do this, the Anthony hand clap? Where's Anthony? Is he here? I don't see Anthony. He has a great hand clap, but I can't remember the rhythm. Anyway, so clearly lots of ideas and hopefully lots of connections. And we'll show you where our participants got to later in our talk. Some of you may remember, as John Lennon once said, sorry, you have to have a Beatles reference. John Lennon once said, I think for some of the older members of the audience or something like that, you may remember, bless you, the 2000s when Dogma was still quite new and EdTech was quite new, and there was some pretty heated debate online about whether or not the two were compatible or incompatible. And for a while it seemed as if these two ideas, so I've been given a microphone and I'm kind of dangling nervously with the cable, whether these two ideas could be used together. You know, was Dogma so kind of hardcore about using materials or using technology that it couldn't adapt to this changing environment? It was changing rapidly. But the nature of the change actually answered the question, because as Web 2.0 emerged as this new iteration of the internet, it became apparent, not just to Scott and myself as we were writing the book, but to other educators, like Graham Stanley, like Corinne Sylvester, who were some of the early bloggers about this, to Howard Vickers, who spoke with us in Brighton 2 or 3 years ago, that actually you could use mobile technology in a way that was perfectly consistent with Dogma principles in the classroom. And Web 2.0 tools in general are bottom-up, they're personalized, they're collaborative. It's a very different environment and experience to the internet as experienced by people in the early 2000s, for example. And the idea of bottom-up learning, personalized learning, collaborative teaching and learning involving the teacher and the learners are absolutely central to Dogma. And a new generation of educators are blending the two, really without worrying too much about it. But there is still a big debate about the use of technology, not just in ELT classrooms, but in classrooms generally, in education around the world. And it often seems to me that teachers can be caught between two extremes, between two polarities. One extreme being a kind of what might seem like peer pressure to adopt technology. And you know, I can imagine teachers who aren't used to using technology in the classroom being quite kind of pressurized when they read a tweet which takes them to a link to an article which gives you 50 ways to use Skype in the classroom. You know, 50? I don't know, one, you know? And so there's that kind of polarity of pressure to use technology, or at least a sense that teachers might feel about pressure. On the other hand, you have school environments where the organization of the school is kind of banning technology. I went back into the classroom about 18 months ago. I started teaching regularly again. And literally the first thing that I saw as I went into the school where I was working was a student having their iPhone confiscated, which I thought was a very kind of telling moment. And as Hakan mentioned, since then, I have started using iPhones and started using Google in the classroom and experimenting myself at quite a basic level, I have to say, with using technology. So the debate, it seems to me, is often situated in the context of existing classroom practice. What do we already do? Does technology fit or not? But new technology involves new behaviors. It involves new ways of navigating information and the world that we live in. And it's so new and so different that we may need to change our teaching to fit the new technology. Think of the way we experience information and entertainment outside the classroom, using even the most familiar web tools. If you think about Google, it gives us information at the point of need. You know, Google it is one of the most useful and frequently heard phrases, not just in classrooms, but in homes and on buses and in workplaces, everywhere. What do you want to know? Google it. We don't have to wait anymore. On YouTube and on web streaming sites, we can schedule our own use of the media. If we want to see a TV show that hasn't come out in our own country, that's been brought out in the States, we can find it somewhere, if we want it enough. If we feel like watching some music footage, we don't have to wait, as I did as a kid, for it to come on TV. We can just find it on YouTube. We're so used to it now that it's easy to forget what a paradigm shift that involves. If you look at Wikipedia, which is kind of the unofficial official source for so many of us writing and researching now, that's a collaborative enterprise which is funded publicly and by donation. So we don't wait for information. We don't do things in a set order. We don't rely on official sources to provide us with information or definitive answers. But we still expect our learners to do this in school a lot of the time. That's one reason why we have to rethink our pedagogy, moving from a delivery model to a participation model, from linear teaching to organic learning. We'd just like to share with you part of a very recent article that I came across in the Times Educational Supplement, which is a magazine for all teachers in the UK. And the author, Tom Barrett, who's arguing in favour of the use of social media in the classroom, says blogs are a platform to publish to the world. He's focusing on blogs at this point, shouting about the wonderful things happening in your classroom. And they offer the perfect space to developing language and literacy skills. Through blogs, parents can see their children learning pretty much as it happens, without having to wait until the end of the day to ask them what they've been studying. It's appealing to look beyond our own borders, but it's often communication within your immediate community, your class, their parents, the school, that has the most powerful impact. The blog is a chronicle of the life and times of your classroom, something to be proud of. And those ideas of community, of locally situated learning, are so much in line with the principles of dogma and teaching unplugged, as is, well, I should add that the idea of getting classroom content beyond, what does he say, looking beyond our own borders, this idea of kind of breaking down classroom rules, is, I would suggest, an addition to some of the dogma principles, but one that really supports the pedagogy. So, we've established that there are possible connections, but if you think of that 50 ways to use Skype in the classroom, and you might feel as confused as I do, you might be asking yourself the question, with so many online tools to choose from, which should we go for? And I'm hoping Burcu will tell us about some now.
As we all know, there are thousands, millions of web tools. But we don't need to know them all. The critical thing here, as I mentioned before, is to be able to pick the right tools for our classrooms that are appropriate for our teaching context. I'm going to share with you a checklist that you can use before you decide whether to use a tool or not. Of course, the answers to these questions don't have to be yes all the time, but this is just a guideline to check your decision and reflect on your decision in this way. Is it easy to use? Is it a fun tool? Is it appropriate for your students' age, abilities, cultural backgrounds, and interests? Do your students take responsibility for using this technology? Does it offer various activities? Does it allow students to practice their English in a meaningful way? Is it justified from a pedagogical point of view, or is it just a cool new toy? Is it easy to integrate with other tools? And is it safe? This is very important. Is it safe to use with students? Well, you can find these questions on our digital handout that we're going to share with you online later on. Today, I'm not going to tell you about 50 ways of using Skype or another tool. We picked 3 tools that we thought every English teacher should know about. Evernote, Scoopit, and Lineoid. Could you please put your hand up if you know any of these tools? Cool. Keep your hand up if you use one of these tools or any of these tools in your classroom with your students. Okay. All right, thank you. Well, one important connection is that the words that are used to describe these tools are also used when we talk about teaching unplugged. Learner autonomy, interactivity, collaboration, creativity, fun and engagement. The good thing about these tools are they're accessible from different devices, like tablets, smartphones, computers. They're all very easy to use, and they're all free. Let's start with Evernote. Evernote is a tool that lets you keep your documents in one place. And using Evernote, you can organize notes, clips from web pages, PDF files, audio recordings, anything, and store them all in one place. Although Evernote, you can use Evernote for so many different purposes, today I'm going to mention its great potential for student portfolios. Because we want our students to take the responsibility for their own learning, right? And learning is a continuous process. Then, as teachers, we need to help them, we need to show them ways of how to keep the record of this process, and Evernote is a great tool for this. Let's think about the paper portfolios. What happens to paper portfolios when the school year finishes? The best scenario is that there are special cupboards in our schools, and teachers can store them in safe places. And are they sent home when the school year finishes, or are they kept in school? If they're sent home, do they ever come back to school? And as the years pass, what happens? How can the students see their progress within these piles of folders? And Evernote can be a solution for this. In Evernote, everything is stored in notebooks. They're not called folders. They're called notebooks. And all the documents, each document you post there is called a note. This is a screenshot from the notebook I created for IATEFL Liverpool. I posted everything that I think I might need. My flight details, my booking form, and the confirmation that I got from IATEFL, etc., etc. Now I can find them. I can reach these documents from my iPad, iPhone, or computer anywhere. And this is what a student portfolio might look like. This looks very black and white, very serious, but it might look very colorful when teenagers post their stuff, their work in it. And let's talk about what can go into students' digital notebooks. Actually, anything that your students think that worth keeping. Tasks, projects, drawings, stories, research papers, exam papers, audio recordings, videos, and photographs of work. When I was trying to find out more about Evernote, I saw that there are more than 10 books written for Evernote. Practical tips for educators, how to organize yourself, this kind of stuff. On the digital handout that we're going to give you the link of, you can find very nice resources to find out more about Evernote, because it has a lot of different features. For example, it can recognize text. You take a picture and you're wearing, there's a t-shirt in the picture and there's a text on it. It can recognize it as a text and it makes it searchable, this text on the t-shirt. It's really great. Okay, the second tool is Scoop It. And this is our digital handout for this session, actually. We scooped a lot of... Really? 5 minutes? Seriously? Okay. All right. For each topic on Scoop It, you create a web page, and we're not going to finish it in 5 minutes. Anyway, I'm going online. I'm going to show you the digital handout that we created on Scoop It, and I'm giving you the link of it. It's scoopit/t unplugged and connected. Well, we'll show you the link later. Here are some articles that we scooped for you. And in your classroom, you can use Scoop It for different purposes. You can publish class magazines. scoops about specific topics, special days, holidays, etc. You can design group activities. Different groups of students can have their scoop-its. You can use as digital handouts, collect and share reading materials with students, foster discussions about current events, and create reading lists. Okay, the last one is Linowit. Linowit is a corkboard, but it's an online corkboard, and it can be used for a variety of purposes. This is the Linowit that we created in Istanbul for our course, and we asked the question to the participants about Web 2.0 tools that they would like to use. And they just gave it a try and posted their answers to Linowit. Actually, we created one for you. You can take a picture of this link. And you would like to try this tool, you can go to this link and answer this question. Tell us what you think you can use Linowit for. I'm going to share with you a couple of tips. Okay. Yes, you can brainstorm, your students can brainstorm on collaborative projects, outline tasks necessary to complete these projects, create word walls, have discussions, get feedback from your students, post announcements, birthday wishes, etc. Okay, and please also check out these tools. I'm not going to mention them, I can't. Digo for social bookmarking, it is really great. Google Drive is for collaboration, and Edmodo, it is safe social networking for schools. All these tools make your classroom walls thinner and make you and your students connected.
Okay, and I think what struck me about those tools as we prepared this talk is that they answer some of the big questions thrown up by Teaching Unplugged. One of the questions is, how do we deal with, how do we record content that comes out of interaction in class? It's not in a coursebook, it's coming out of what happens on the day. Evernote presents one possible answer to that because it allows us to post classroom outputs online, collect them, to make sense of them, to order them. In terms of Scoop It, and I think this is particularly relevant not to teaching environments like the UK, but to non-ESL environments where people don't have a reason necessarily to use English outside the classroom, is that gives the teacher a chance to bring in content from outside, to bring in different text types, to find real uses of English from the internet, bring them into the classroom, and so the teacher and, by extension, the students can become curators of online content. And the third one, Linowit, was very interesting to me. We did two kind of sticky boards in our course. We had a real sticky board with sticky notes, and we had the Linowit that we did online. And as what you showed us and took us through Linowit, the sticky notes kind of moved into autumn and started dropping like leaves. And I thought it was so interesting. And there was one session, could be a long minute, but we'll do our best. There was one session where we found ourselves talking about the ideas of Paulo Freire and the pedagogy, Eduardo, the pedagogy of the oppressed, and the whole tradition of radical education. And kind of talking about Linowit, which is just one web tool that's often used in a fun way. And I thought, A, how interesting it was that we were talking about these two things in the same session. But as I saw the autumn of the analog stickies going on there, and Burcu then took us through a web quest, which involved leading us as participants or learners in a classroom through a series of steps which allowed them to create a digital poster designed in a way that was relevant to our context to persuade a teaching manager to allow people to use social media at work. And it occurred to me that if we want to follow the example of Paulo Freire, if we want to follow the deeper implications of Teaching Unplugged, and we want to use education to change the world and not just to prepare people for the world as it is, then digital literacy is a big part of this. And these days, we're not going to change the world with sticky notes. Yeah? Where there's change in the world, we saw this during the Arab Spring. We've seen it for positive purposes, like there. We've seen it for perhaps negative purposes, with the riots in the UK, although we need to understand why those happened. People are using social media to activize, to be activists, To activize, let's use that. Yeah? Occupy, movement. The pictures are of people holding posters in the press, but the activity is also happening online. And people are doing things which aren't going to fall off walls. They're allowing people to connect. So there are deep connections to make here also. Is that it? Or has
I think so.
we're almost there.
Let's show the one.
Yeah, let's show you, of course. I knew there was one more thing. I'll just show you where our participants got to. And I'll read through because it's small. But right in the middle, we watched this happen. We didn't know what they were going to do. We didn't have an answer to this. This was at the end of our course. And I think both of us were thinking, gosh, what if they don't write anything in the middle? But gradually, a lot of things came up, and people started to share their thoughts. And in the middle, we've got creating your own content and context. All learning styles addressed. Language as a tool, not a target. Using available sources. Ongoing learning, learning-based, student-centered. Non-linear, more motivation. Process-oriented. Learner autonomy. Fostering creativity. A personalized syllabus. Self-expression for the learners. Expenses on books go down. Good for schools, not so good for publishers. Teacher becoming a mentor, a facilitator, a mediator. And so key to all of this, and key to the use of web tools in ESL context, is this giving people a real reason to communicate, to share stuff, to make connections with classrooms in other countries where people are also learning English. So this is what we came up with, little phrase at the bottom, let's do and learn together. But I think the key is, that where we're coming from, is that these two approaches, which have been exciting us for years, or many of us in ELT, can reinforce and support one another. Yeah? The use of Web 2.0 tools can reinforce and augment and extend an unplugged approach. And the use, or thinking about Unplugged as a pedagogy, as a teaching approach, thinking about the principles and implications of that, can ground our use of technology in the classroom. So potentially, where the ideas meet, is a very exciting space, which we invite you to explore, and invite you also to look at the links that Reggie's prepared on the Scoopit. And there is a thing saying, very politely, please end the session. Thank you very much.